We're good? All right, excellent. So I will call the Tuesday, June 27th, 2023 regular council meeting to order. And I will begin with a land acknowledgement that the City of Fort Saskatchewan is located within Treaty 6 territory and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4, the ancestral and traditional territory of the Nihilwak, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux Sioux, and Métis, and we acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. It is because of our treaty relationship that we can live, work, and play on Treaty 6 territory. And just as I note as I close this land acknowledgement that today the City of Fort Saskatchewan raised the two flags that will be outside of City Hall in perpetuity, and it was so wonderful to have so many of our Indigenous community come out to support the event. So, thank you. All right, there are no items for consent agenda, so we'll begin with approval of the June 13th, 2023 regular council meeting. The minutes. Councillor Macon.
I'll make the motion that we approve the minutes of the June 13th, 2023 regular council meeting.
Thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? Not seeing any. I will close the motion. Please cast your vote.
We're just waiting on Councillor Macon.
Okay, thank you. That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. At this point in time, this is an opportunity for delegations. There are none that have registered, but if anybody would like to come and speak to the two items that we have on the agenda, this would be your opportunity to come forward and have 5 minutes to speak to these items. Not seeing anybody racing up to the speaker's box, we will move right on to unfinished business. 10-year capital plan review, Shannon Andruko and Jeremy Eamon.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and members of Council. My name is Shannon Andruko, Manager of Budget and Financial Planning. Joining me today is Jeremy Eamon, Chief Finance Officer. The purpose of today's presentation is to provide Council with an update on the City's 2024 to 2033 10-year capital plan. This will include a review of the City's spending priorities, including major capital projects, new capital projects, life cycle replacement projects, and the Horizon list. In addition, administration encourages Council's feedback on the 10-year capital plan, and if Council desires, amendments can be made through an amending motion. The 10-year capital plan underwent its most recent review by Council in 2022 during the 2023 budget meetings. The plan serves as a strategic framework for effectively managing the City's capital investment over the next decade. In addition, the capital plan serves as a comprehensive long-term financial planning document. Major capital projects undergo evaluation, planning, and approval within the framework defined in the Operating and Capital Budgets Policy. The approval process for major capital projects occurs in two phases. The first phase involves partial design and funding up to 10% based on a Class 5 estimate. The second phase involves final approval for the remaining design and construction based on a Class 2 estimate. Within the 10-year capital plan, there are 10 major capital projects planned for the first 5 years and 3 projects in the latter half of the 10-year period. Now I'll walk through the major capital projects planned for the first 5 years. Starting with Veterans Way Corridor Widening Phase 1. Following the defeat of the borrowing bylaw in April, this project has been reintegrated into the 10-year capital plan for 2024. The successful completion of this project relies on funding from other levels of government. If no commitment is received before February 2024, the project will be postponed until 2029. Construction for the remaining phases is currently scheduled for 2029 through to 2032. The pedestrian crossing north, this project has also been reintegrated into the 10-year capital plan for 2024. The implementation is dependent on the completion of Phase 1 widening. The budget allocated for 2024 is $3.7 million, based on a Class 2 estimate. Secondary alternative water source. The primary objective of this project is to identify the most suitable option to fulfill the city's water requirements in response to the increasing needs or demands. Council has approved $700,000 for a functional planning study, which will provide a Class 4 estimate or better. $2.5 million is allocated in 2024, specifically for design work on this project. The total project budget of $25 million is a preliminary estimate and will be further refined following the completion of the functional planning study. 100th Ave and Legacy Park Road Enhancement has moved from the Horizon list to the 10-year capital plan. Based on the findings from the Municipal Pavement Management System, it was determined that the roadway and Warden House parking area required reconstruction in 2022. The design work for this project was completed internally in 2022. In addition to new pavement, the project includes drainage improvements, curb installation, and enhancements to pedestrian movement. $1 million budget is allocated to 2024 based on a Class 2 estimate. Aquatics planning and construction, a budget of $4.4 million has been allocated for 2024. This budget is designated for the design process and further refinement of the project scope. The estimated remaining budget of $42 million is allocated for years 26 through to 27 and represents a Class 5 estimate. Once the project attains a Class 2 estimate, Council's approval will be sought. As part of the Phase 2 of the Indoor Recreation Infrastructure Service Level Review, a facility program will be presented to Council on July 4th of 2023. The facility program will be used to evaluate and refine this project scope. New fire station planning and construction. Start date for this project shifted from 2024 to 2025. A budget of $2 million has been allocated for 2025, which will be used for the design process and further refinement of the project scope. The construction phase is planned to occur in 2026 and 2027. Further discussion regarding this project is planned in 2024. City limit entrance signs. The start date of this project has been rescheduled from 2024 to 2025 to align with the outcomes of the city's branding review. The purpose of this project is to update and relocate the entrance signs to align with the city's new boundaries. In 2025, the budget of $100,000 has been allocated to design work, and the construction phase in 2026 has a Class 5 estimate of $600,000, which will be refined during the project's design phase. Paving at the dog park and the Dow Field. This project involves the paving of the road to the dog park and the parking areas at the dog park and the Dow Fields. The project is scheduled for 2027 with a budget of $1.5 million based on a Class 3 estimate. The budget will be refined closer to the construction year with upgraded unit rates. Cemetery Master Plan Area Phase 1 was derived from the 2017 Cemetery Master Plan and focuses on accommodating the city's future cemetery needs. In 2026, a budget of $200,000 has been allocated for design work, while construction phase is planned for 2027 and 2028. Phase 1 is dependent on the Ross Creek Basin study scheduled for 2024. Following the study completion, the 2017 master plan will be revised to identify the growth and development of a new expansion plan. And then the Fort Centre Park Phase 2, design and scope refinement are scheduled to commence in 2027 with a design budget of $500,000. The construction phase is planned for 2029 through to 2031 within the allocated $4 million budget based on a Class 5 estimate. One final note, in accordance to the operating and capital budgets policy, no major capital projects moved from the last 5 years into the first 5 years since the plan was last reviewed. In the last 5 years, 2029 to 2033, there are 3 major capital projects identified. The projects include Veterans Way Corridor, phases 2 to 5, pedestrian crossing south, and replacing of the 100th Ave Ross Creek Bridge. There are 4 new minor capital projects that have been included in the capital plan. The projects include a hydraulic lift trailer, which is planned for 2024. This equipment will transport lifts to various city facilities. There's the precinct interpretive signs for 2024. These signs will promote inclusivity and address colonial language and historical inaccuracies and fair representation of the First Nations and Métis. There's an electric forklift scheduled for 2025. This equipment will be used to handle and move material and equipment in the public works yard. And then the final one is the Indigenous interpretive panels planned for 2025 through to 2027. This project intends to showcase the history of Indigenous people in Fort Saskatchewan. There are 2 significant life cycle replacements scheduled within the 5-year capital plan. These replacements are as follows. The first one is a Pumper 3 replacement plan for 2024. This project is budgeted at $1.7 million. The second one is a ladder 1 replacement scheduled for 2027 with a budget of $2.5 million. The Horizon List is used to track capital projects not within the 10-year capital plan. The Horizon List undergoes an annual review to assess status and viability of the projects listed. The process of transitioning major capital projects from the Horizon List to the capital plan follows the same framework as the major capital projects established in the operating and capital budgets policy. The Horizon List has 4 new additions, which include expanding the local transit service to developing areas in the city, historical archive storage room upgrades at City Hall, a garbage collection vehicle for city parks, and a scattering garden at the cemetery. These projects require further evaluation and consideration for future inclusion into the city capital plan. 4 projects have been transferred from the 10-year capital plan to the Horizon List for evaluation and consideration. These projects are as follows. The traffic lights at 108th Street and 99th Ave, the Arborist lift truck, the transfer station Freon removal building, and River Road Windsor Point lift station SCADA network connection. 4 projects have been removed from the Horizon List as their evaluation and planning will be conducted as part of a master plan. These projects include the Park Satellite Building, West River's Edge Community and Facility Trails, and the Cemetery Concrete Runners. The report provides further details regarding which master plan these projects are associated with. As for the next steps, administration will take back any feedback from Council for consideration and development of the 2024 capital budget and the 10-year capital plan according to the established timelines. In addition, detailed funding analysis and potential refinement work will be done. And finally, the 2024 capital budget and 10-year capital plans will be presented to Council on October 16th and 20th. That concludes my presentation. Jeremy and I are here to take your questions.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to go back to the purpose again. So the purpose is to receive feedback, but if I'm understanding this correct, if council wants something moved at this point in time, they need to put a motion, amending motion on. I'm looking out into a vast bunch of faces looking away. And I'm just wondering because, I mean, we're going to be discussing this when we discuss the capital budget. So I guess I'm just really looking for clarification. So if you were to, go ahead, Jeremy.
To your worship, yes. So basically, the purpose of this meeting is to review the updated 10-year capital plan, updated with changes from when council reviewed it back in October of 2022. If there are any changes that council wishes to make to the plan and in its current state, yes, there would be an amending motion put forward and voted on. But the main purpose is to get feedback from council for preparation of the council budget presentations and deliberations this fall for 2024.
Okay, but then also, whatever is decided here today isn't final. When this comes back, things can still move around based on motions when we do the capital budget.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I've got clarity on the purpose. So we can provide feedback, but if you want something moved at this point or time or considering that, then put a motion on and council can discuss and debate it. It seems like we're doing that kind of twice, but I'll leave it with that. We'll go into questions, feedback. Go ahead, Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. Just give me a second, please. On the schedule for the Jubilee Recreation Center modernization, the budget number now, if I add this correctly, is in excess of $16 million. The budget, as I recall, and I did look back to last fall, at that time it was approximately $12 million. And yet I couldn't find, maybe I missed it, I didn't see any reference to what caused this budget to change.
Sorry about that. I probably should have had a note. This budget was changed due to the approval of the project early this spring, the JRC modernization.
And the approval was at,
It was,
Council.
yeah,
I need one answer only. The answer is,
the approval was the 16.5 million.
sorry, repeat.
16.5 million.
I do not recall that, thank you. You know what, I'm going to quit for a second. I'm going to ring in again, let everybody else go. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Macon.
I have two questions right now. The first one, so the fire trucks that are in there for replacement, do their own replacement reserves completely cover those costs?
That is correct.
Okay. And then how much longer do we have the sump pump program going? Does it go much longer than the 2033 that it's on here?
I'll have to get Grant Schaefer to come up and answer that question.
Yeah.
Your worship, the Councillor Macon, it's around the 2033 mark. We're going to reevaluate this fall to see where we're at with everything we've done so far and what's still left to
Okay.
really map that out.
Okay, thanks, Grant. That's it for now.
Very good. Councillor Harris.
We've got money in the budget this year for traffic calming and also next year. Is there any possibility that the project schedule for next year, which I believe is a roundabout, could be moved to this year? Has enough engineering been done? I know that you've tendered, or it is going to be tendered out for the roundabout on West Park Drive. Have you gotten that far with the engineering design for the other one?
Your worship, the Councillor Harris, we haven't proceeded with the design on that side of it yet for the second one.
How long does the design take for something like that?
Probably another 6 weeks or so, with depending on how their schedule is the design company schedule set up to be. At this point, we haven't. It's part of their scope, but it was for at the end of the project to be ready for next year.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So we would miss the construction window for this year if we were to look at moving it unless it was really expedited.
Your worship, Councillor Harris, I believe so, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Abatoye.
Thank you for your presentation. Grant, I think you just sit there because I think my questions are going to be for you. So, Veteran Way widening. I was at the Dow open house yesterday, and I think one of the things they talked about was that the RTO of completion for phase 2 is at 2029. And so, if I wonder how, because I see that we have design for 2028 for the, for phase 2. How's that going to impact that project, considering Dow's ongoing projects?
Your worship, Councillor Batoye, we're trying to match the construction to where we think that traffic will start to, construction traffic will start to draw down. So it's a little bit fluid when we're looking out 6 years or so, 5-6 years. It may adjust a year or so, but that's what we're aiming for a construction year based on what we knew at the time.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is to you, Sharon. So just back to Councillor Kelly's question, because I see the capital project budget last year that was approved for JRC was about 11 million. And we're currently at 16 million. And it just takes me back to what you talked about in the package. We have a two-phase approval process. So is that why the numbers differ?
That is correct. So when we come back for the class 2 or higher, we're refining the cost of the project.
Okay. Can I ask one more question?
Nope.
What?
I'll come back to you.
Oh, for sure.
Everybody's on here. So, Councillor Nguyen. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. This question is just a follow-up question to the sump pump retrofit program. So that's extended to 10 years. That's solely for the Sienna area. Is that correct?
Your worship, Councillor Nguyen, no, it extends within South Point as well.
Okay. Okay. How close is Sienna to being complete? How many of these years that are allocated within the capital plan apply to Sienna? I think I heard 3 or 4 years the last time we discussed it.
Your worship, the councillor, off the top of my head, I'm saying 3, but I could be off by a year.
That'd be accurate then. Okay, thank you. My second question for now, phase 1 of Fort Centre Park has been delayed due to oral history. My impression was that we were going to begin construction of phase 2 earlier than 2027. So did the timeline for that change? Because I think phase 1 is only a 1-year build out. Does that sound accurate?
Through your worship, you are correct. We did push construction of that back a year to allow for 2 years of design.
It's 2 years of design for phase 1.
For phase 2.
Sorry, for phase 2. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blizzard.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. For the sump pump retrofit, are all the West Park ones done? I know there was a handful that were in West Park too, right? Individual houses that had issues?
Your worship, Councillor Blizzard, at this time those aren't included in the program. They'd be at the back end of the program if we were going to hit one off. So we'd have to have those discussions with council.
Okay. And one more, this is for budgeting, and I know this is a few years out, but did I hear you right? City limit signs, $100K for planning, and then another $600,000 for city limit signs.
Your worship, Councillor Blizzard, right now we just don't know what we're going to do. To be honest, and that's why the number is sitting where it's at. If it's just a basic static sign, obviously that's a different budget than if we wanted to do something electronic, more as a message board or things like that. So it's just discussions to be had.
Just a placeholder. I heard that and went, okay. I remember Edmonton having some big discussions about weird signs a number of years ago. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to come to the question about the highway again. So what you indicated is if you don't have an answer by February from the provincial government, then that money would, then it wouldn't happen. So Can you tell me when they approved their budget? Because it's in April, not February. So I guess the question that I have to you is, where do you think this money's going to appear from, since we haven't been able to get it so far?
Through your worship, it was my direction to have this placed here, so I'll take the questions, and I think it's unlikely we're going to get any funding from other levels of government. I will say that. But I guess the question is, should we try for a little while longer or not? And I think my direction was, we'll give it one more kick at the can and see what happens.
Okay, so then I guess my next question is, because I know you've got debt for 5.12 million and grant of 3.68 million. So if we don't get any funding, I guess the question is, where is that money going to roll into? What's our next highest priority? Is it the fire hall? Because this is 9 million, the fire hall's 11.5. So I'm kind of looking.
Yeah, through your worship, I think we would determine the best way to reallocate the MSI or LGFF funding at that point, once we know for sure.
Okay, I'll have more questions, but I will stick to my two for now. Councillor Kelly, you're up.
Thank you again. I just want confirmation on the last comment from Mayor Katcher. The new fire hall budget is somewhere around in excess of 20 million, not 11.5. Correct? Thank you.
Oh.
And I only brought it up, Mayor Katcher, because I didn't want the public record to show 11.5 when it's twice that number.
Yeah, I need a bigger laptop like you.
Yeah, I get it. Absolutely. I don't want to talk about the totals. The 5 years ending in 28, so 24 to 28 inclusive. The capital budget, as it sits right now, calls for $184 million in expenditures. It would be nice to have, in my opinion, the funding below that for at least the 5 years. And if we get that at the budget time, I think we could add it so that we have a consistent approach all the way through. And then I would like to add, because I think this is equally important, the estimated operating budget impact for each of the items that show up in the 5-year plan. And I'll be specific. There's a fire hall. I want to know when early on in the game, not later on in the game, what the operating impact is for that, for the swimming pool. Those are the two obvious big ones, but we end up with impacts to reserves for things like a $2 million ladder truck as well. So would those be possible, and do you need a motion to have that happen?
Mr. Fleming. Level of detail.
Well, through your worship, I'll let Ms. Andruko go first, and then I'm happy to take the question if she doesn't have anything.
Okay. Ms. Andruko.
So to have that detail of work for this time of the year is quite labor intensive, and we're not there yet. That's why we include it towards the budget, in the budget process in the document, is when we have everything finalized. We include all that information. And last year, I remember us bringing back the operating impact in the 10-year capital plan, so we do intend to continue with that.
But once you have the numbers, you would need then the effort required for the midterm update would simply be to review them and make sure that they make sense again.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be a great deal of effort. Am I misunderstanding something there?
Well, we have to analyze all the funding sources to ensure.
But you do that in the fall, right, Shannon?
Yeah.
Mr. Eamon.
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Kelly, I would just add to that is this initial review. There's also opportunities for council to change timing and the years, and so that's another reason why we don't want to commit to the operating impacts and finalizing them in case there are shifts in that. This meeting, like I said, is a chance to refine it for that fall, where we will have the operating impacts fleshed out.
I don't want to debate it with you folks. Mayor Katcher, I'm going to make a motion on this. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I move that the capital budget that is presented in June of each year, being as how that's our new policy, that's a sidebar, that the June capital budget include for the 5 years out, 5-year period out, the funding sources, estimated impacts on reserves and borrowing capacity, and in addition also include the operating budget impacts, and it can be just a total for right now, but for each year, and if items are significant, then of course a breakdown. So I know I'm rambling here a little bit, and I apologize, Cheryl, or Cheryl's not here anymore, Jennifer. The gist of it is, I'd like to see the funding, the impacts on reserves, impact on debt, and operating impacts, operating budget impacts for each of those 5 years out. Thank you. And that would be my motion, Mayor Catcher.
Are you, Jennifer? Andrew?
We're trying to hash this one out. I think I caught most of what you're looking for here, but I'm just going to finesse it here, and we'll put it up on the screens in a second if you'd like to speak.
Yeah,
to it
I
or
apologize.
elaborate.
I wasn't particularly clear either, Andrew.
So what I've got is move that the June capital budget include for the 5-year period funding sources, reserve impacts, and operating impacts.
And debt limit.
And debt.
Debt limit.
And
impact.
debt limits.
Or total debt. Either one is fine, Mayor Catcher.
Does that cover it?
Yes, very succinct and covers it nicely. Thank you.
Okay, I'll accept the motion. You can speak to your motion.
I don't know if I have a lot to add, Mayor Catcher. To me, it's obvious. I think whenever we look at something this significant, we should look at the total package. I understand that there's some work required, but once it's in place, it should only be updating, just the same as we update many of the lines within the budget. It's an update process. I don't like any resemblance to anything that looks to me like a creeping commitment. In other words, we deal with it piecemeal over a number of years rather than getting it all on the table to start with. I welcome comments, obviously, from fellow councillors. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got everybody recorded who's next in speaking order outside of the motion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everybody off, and I'll come back to you after the fact. So the motion has been spoken to, so we're only dealing with this motion at this point in time. So Councillor Macon.
Thank you. I appreciate where the motion is going, but I believe that the people doing the work just said we're not there, and it's very labor intensive. Is the reason why they don't have this information. So I'm a little confused about why we put it back to them and say, well, no, I hear that, but you have to do the work. So I guess unless they have any other comments on whether or not this can be done within their own, like within the time they have allocated already, then I wouldn't support it.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to you. I've got Councillor Abatoye next.
So seeing that we are already in the end of June and your motion specifically says June report, am I asked to assume that this is to begin from next year? Okay, thank you. I definitely support it then, because I think it's important information that's we need as we go forward in this. And maybe I should ask you, Shannon, the question. is it something you see you think you can achieve realistically starting from next year? Because obviously this year is gone, that's out of the way. And maybe because I know you provided similar information over budgets, right? But for something like this, and you have 1 year out to prepare, maybe not something so detailed like he had said, right? So, but just some sort of information that shows, ballpark what we're looking at, because these are huge numbers, right?
I would have to get back to you on that.
Well, we're making a decision right now. Well, I guess you don't have an answer then.
I don't have an answer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the intent of this motion and also the complexity involved with allocating operating impacts of future facilities within the capital plan that don't exist yet. If we're, for example, a swimming pool that we don't know the scope, size, scale, functionality of it, to try to pinpoint operating the costs of something like that could be complicated, complex. Obviously, if this does pass and then we see something in a year, then the operating impacts of these capital projects are going to be tailored kind of per capital project based on the information that we have and decisions of council at that time. So I would like to see information on operating impacts. I think it's critical for decisions in a capital of a capital nature. So I'll support the motion for that matter.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a question regarding this. I think, so I guess really the question that I have is today is just kind of purpose. You want to kind of an understanding of where it's going so that you can kind of direct and dig deeper into the projects that you think might make the cut. And then it's not about doing this for every project. I guess that's my question. I guess that'll be my question to Councillor Kelly when I come to him. So, and I ask that question because if we're going to do that, then I'm thinking then we might as well just go through every project right now and make a decision and do our capital budget in June. So I think if you're doing that and bringing it to us, and I think we do this in September or October, I think I'm comfortable with that because you don't know what's going to change at this point in time. This is just your best guess. Okay. Yeah. So I think I'm comfortable with the process the way it is right now. I'm not seeing any other questions or discussion or debate. Councillor Kelly, I'll go to you.
Thank you. I got the impression from yourself that you had a question of me.
Yeah, the question really was you want this for every project that's on there?
Here's what I believe should happen with the capital budget. I believe firmly that for a line item to make it to the 5-year plan, that administration should be doing an operating cost impact so that it comes part and parcel with the movement. We ought to be considering that information along with the cost to capital cost always. The swimming pool was referenced, I think, by Councillor Nguyen. I know I asked during last year's budget what the operating estimate was for a new swimming pool, and administration provided a number. I understand that it's a rough number, I get that, but it's a number. And it was significantly higher than the existing number. That's the important part. We already have it. So it's not a lot of work to put it on the schedule. And once you start, then the work is there. And it's simply updating. And we updated, I didn't count the red lines on this budget, but 25 of those. I would remind council, or just suggest to council, that when we're talking a budget of $184 million, that the effort required to expend $184 million ought to be meaningful. And it's not necessarily going to be easy. And if we need more staff, let's have that conversation. I'm open to that. But I would like the capital budgets to be complete and definitive and give me as a taxpayer and a councillor a really good understanding of what we're into and what we're proposing to do. and I don't like it part-time. And the review in June is correct my memory here, like 2 or 3 years old now. I think it's a policy we started fairly recently, so maybe it's time to upgrade it, time to improve it. I know, and I recall during the fall review of the capital budget, and I think we had discussions on a council meeting in January or February about the capital budget, and I was reminded that I got to talk about it in June, and if I had that question in June, why didn't I raise it? Well, we're here and I'm raising it. So I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to get the complete package in front of us, and we need to know the operating impacts because those invariably, not always, but invariably, are larger than the capital impact. And if you look at authoritative research on this subject, they stress budgeting life cycle costs. So that's initial cost plus the operating cost plus the planned or known or anticipated capital cost over the life cycle. So I think we need to start, again, I stress, for $184 million, we should have a complete picture, and we should do what it takes to have the complete picture. And those are my comments. Thanks, Mayor Catcher.
Okay, not your close as well.
Absolutely. I have nothing else to say.
I think there was one. Oh,
Sorry, if I may, through your worship to Councillor Kelly, if you don't mind sharing my screen, I just want to make sure that we're achieving your intent. And so from what I gathered, we're looking at June of next year, but then in perpetuity going forward, this is an expectation for...
Oh. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, absolutely, Andrew. I'm not expecting that administration is going to bring this back to us next week or for the July meeting for with that kind of information attached. Commencing 24. How's that sound?
Okay.
As an editorial change to the motion.
Pardon? Oh, okay. Councillor Harris?
So you're just talking about understanding the operating impact from any capital project that we put on here that makes the cut for a 5-year or for an expenditure over that period of time. And so this work, you wouldn't be expecting the detailed information until our discussions for the budget in 2024. Because when you started out on this thing, I thought you wanted it and you wanted it by the middle of July. I'm just trying to understand when you want this and what ultimately you're going to do with it.
Okay. Oops. Sorry, my fingers aren't working. Go ahead. You can respond to Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Councillor Harris. It was not my intent, and I admit I didn't speak that clearly when I started. I know this information takes a little bit of time to get, and I don't expect it till we have this process 1 year from now, when the budget comes in front of us. In fact, I'm going to suggest that it should be a normal portion, should be normally included with every capital budget that this council reviews. So that happens in November and that happens in June. And that information should be part and parcel, and we have it. We have most of it already. The funding is already included in November. It can be added for June so that the picture is consistent throughout. So that's where I'm coming from. Does that help your understanding?
Push your button. Yeah. Just a second. I'm not that fast.
That helps to understand because ultimately I'm cognizant of the work that it does present to our staff in a short period of time. And your initial, or my understanding of your initial discussion on this thing was saying that's a hurry up amount of information, which I'm not sure we might eventually use, but I'm not sure it would ultimately add to the overall decision making in the short term. So correcting it for next year, and that gives our staff significant amount of time to cozy up to that concept. Is that a fair statement? Can you make that happen by next year? Is it doable?
Through your worship to Councillor Harris, I think it can. I think the only major challenge that I see is that during the time frame from January to June, we're building the capital budget. Directors are going back and deciding what becomes a priority for the following budget year. So to do that work for operating impacts, I would look maybe for clarity. Is it major capital projects over 500,000 that you would be looking at just to fine tune that? Because we're talking about, trucks worth $50,000 have operating impacts and so forth. If we concentrated on major capital, that would be a bit of a refinement. It'd be my question.
Are you good?
Well, I think that's a good clarification, and that's why I wanted to hear what staff had to say, because we want an efficient and effective process that gives council definitive information on which to make a strategic decision. And if what you're talking about is kind of fuzzy time frame, and you've got a lot of other things, and I don't think adding additional staff is necessarily the answer. It might be one answer. So I'm just trying to understand what you're trying to get at, Councillor Kelly. And I'm not opposed to it. I just want to make sure that we do it for the right reasons in the right way for the right outcome. And if it achieves what you're looking for, and I laud your goal there, to make more informed decisions from a capital standpoint, well then that makes sense. So that's what I was looking for that clarification for.
Okay, if you can just write that down, because there's one more. I'll go to Councillor Blissard and then I'll come back to you.
So I guess my question is, and I'm reading what it says, the purpose of today's report is to provide council with an update and ask our opinion on some of these or provide feedback. Does the feedback need, or do we need all that information? I think now the purpose of this is to have us say, you know what, we want that fire station next coming year, or we want it moved up, and then you can adjust accordingly, not that we need all the numbers. So I just don't see the need for all that information that's being asked, especially on an annual basis. I think it's going to be difficult, and it's going to make a lot of work for you guys. So I don't think I support this. I need to see more reason for needing that in the future.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Noyan next.
Yeah, Jeremy, just to comment on what you mentioned about the size of the capital project. So obviously there'd be some discretion in your department of what a significant operating impact is associated with the capital project to actually be able to report it back or deem it necessary to report back to council. I think some of these projects, for example, like the sump pump retrofit program over $500,000, I don't think there is operating impact associated with that. So would it be helpful if council defined what a significant operating impact would be to a capital project to make it viable to include in this information? Would that help you, I guess, at all, is what I'm asking?
Through your worship to Councillor Noyan, I would just think with the motion, just looking for clarity if it's all capital projects within the 10-year capital plan or just focused on the major capital, which are capital projects over 500,000.
Yeah, maybe Councillor Kelly, you could.
I'm coming to him in a minute.
Yeah, we could define that a little bit better to give them further direction in that capacity.
You're good? Okay. Coming back to Councillor Kelly, this may be a second close.
Listen, good questions. And Jeremy, thank you for your comment. I didn't plan on making a motion till I was sitting here, or I would have been a little clearer. But absolutely, Jeremy, we don't need to worry about operating impacts on smaller items. If you think a $500,000 cutoff for the capital makes sense to you, I would welcome that as an editorial change. Just insert it, Andrew, if possible. I'd like to respond to Councillor Burgett's thoughts. It's not extra information. It's information that we should have. And I will stress again that I think the time to provide that information and for administration to gear up to provide that information is when a capital item, now in excess of $500,000, comes inside the 5-year plan. So that's your first stab at it. And we update it annually. But at least we got a running total at the end of each year for the next 5 years on what we're putting into our operating budget. And I think that's important. I really do. In fact, I think we'll find that it's significant, and we ought to be talking about it, because we don't just not build things because they're too expensive. We might also choose to not build things because they're too expensive to operate, or that the cost of operation might drive the budget differently for the capital budget. So it's when they enter a 5-year plan, and once we get into that process, I don't think the extra work on an annual basis for any of these budgets will be extraordinary once we get into the swing of it. And like I said, I did ask for the operating budget, estimated operating budget on the pool during budget last year, and I had a response fairly quickly. I get it, and I understand that it's a completely rough number, but it did include, most importantly, the debenture cost. And that's the big item for something significant like a pool that we know we can estimate, because that takes no time. So I'll leave it at that, Mayor Catcher. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just giving Andrew, I don't think the motion's correct anymore. I think because it says in June, okay, June each year, commencing June 2024 for the 2025 budget. I don't know if we need all that in there.
No, you're right. Sorry, I didn't know I was still on it.
I think just June each year.
Okay.
I would suggest strongly that the capital budget, every time it's presented to council, would be consistent, starting with June next year. We already provide most of these numbers in the November budget anyway. So we can add the missing pieces starting June of next year.
Oh, so just undo that and just take out for the 2025 budget. That accomplishes what he's asking. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, when I read that, it just looked like it was for the 1 year. Okay.
Okay. I think
Okay.
we're there. Okay.
Okay. So you're good on close then?
I am, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I will close that motion. Please cast your vote. Who do you need?
Councillor Harris.
Can you use your card?
No, I'm opposed.
He's stated he's opposed. So the motion is defeated. Okay. Councillor Kelly, you still had the floor. Do you have anything else? Questions?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll go back to the order. Councillor Abatoye, you are next in the order for questions.
Yes, thank you. So just two quick questions. I think my first question will be around the local road and neighborhood rehabilitation. Is it like a just similar question as a sump pump? Is it like a perpetual project? Do we have a time in mind when we might get a break? You know, I know it's important for us to rehabilitate these things, but when are we catching up?
Your worship, Councillor Abatoye, these two programs are basically pay as you go. So we'll be doing either work or putting money away for the next year's work every year. So there's no real catch up. It's just they're set up to.
So it's going to be ongoing.
It's an ongoing.
Naturally, okay.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And just my final question is to so 2026. We have a $60 million budget, and I wonder, like, how do we decide what goes where? Because that's such a heavy year compared to like the year before. It's a 17 million. And when I look at things like the city limit sign, like that's not something that has to happen in that year. So why have we chosen to put certain projects in this year? Because it's so heavy, and I can't even imagine what the property taxes increase is going to be like in that year.
So to prepare for this meeting, we take the expertise of the staff, letting us know when the projects, where to place projects. We will take this information back, build the funding strategy, and and look at the years and see if we should be moving things and having the subject experts come and have that conversation with us.
Are you done?
I'm thinking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nguyen. You were next in the questions.
Yeah, I just had a question of clarification for the wording around the proposed pumper 3 costs, and I don't know if this is something that Chief Martins could answer, but or if you need to, it's a very small question, and the wording says design and rebuild. Is this for the purchase of a new truck, or is this rebuilding with existing parts and retrofitting the current truck that we have for 1.7 million?
I'll get Fire Chief Martins to come and answer.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Nguyen. So this is a replacement of a current truck that we have. So it is currently at 22 years of service, and we normally replace them at 20 years of service, and so it's a replacement.
Okay, so it's not a rebuild of existing. Okay, that's all my question was. Thanks for your answer.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Macon. You were next. Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Trying to understand the new fire station numbers. So where it says 11.5 million in 2027, is that an additional of 1.5 million, or is that 11.5 a totally new number in the budget?
That was an increase, I believe, of 500,000. If my memory serves me right.
Because it says on A5 the budget increased from 20 million to 21.5 million, and it just didn't jive with my memory on the cost of the fire.
Yeah, so I think we increased it by 500,000.
Okay, so then under A5 where it talks about what that money's for, emergency operations and live training center and equipment in 2027. So I guess my question is, how much of this budget is for emergency operations and live training center and equipment?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Macon. The live fire training center rough cost $500,000 to $600,000.
Okay. Okay, so the fire hall in itself is 21 million. That's what we're expecting. I just want to make sure because it just didn't remember it to be that.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I've got one more question. I don't mean to keep beating a dead horse on the Veterans Way. And I know we keep talking about, well, if the Dow expansion goes forward and we can get ahead of it in 2024, and if we get the money from somewhere else, but I guess just really the question that I have is, you come into the capital budget in this fall and then you ask for approval in December. How can we keep a placeholder of February? Why are we just not saying, you know what, there are so many unknowns on this that we're just going to move it out. Yes, traffic will be a little slower, but there are other priority projects instead of this. So just really somebody help me understand, because I mean, when you're talking about $9 million for the first phase of this highway that we may or may not get any grant money for, why aren't we looking at a different priority? Mr. Fleming, you can choose who can answer. I can't see your thing.
Sorry. Through your worship, we have been consulting with other groups that have done this lobbying and been successful with the province. We've been told that you will know in principle in February whether or not funding is likely to move forward. If in March it would be finalized, but the timelines could work if council wanted to move this way. Of course, if you don't want to go this direction, it would be helpful to know now, since we will be using the next 6 months to do some lobbying.
Okay, and that's why I just keep bringing this up, because if we don't get the money, we lose December, January, February, March, 4 months, which could be going towards another project, and then we have to come back and revisit everything. So that's why I just keep beating this one, because it just feels like there's so many unknowns. Councillor Kelly, you're next, I think. Okay. Oh, just a second. Okay. Councillor Harris, you're actually next on round 2, and then Councillor Kelly on round 3. Go ahead, Councillor Harris.
Well, picking up on your question about Veterans Way, do the warrants suggest that we've reached the point where we're failing in the operation of the roadway? Mr. Schaefer, is that what the warrants would suggest at this point in time?
Your worship, Councillor Harris, I would say the warrants don't say we're there today, but we will be in the next couple of years, just with normal growth without
Exactly, and I'm seeing it more frequently as I'm trying to cross that major thoroughfare, and it appears to me that it makes sense that we follow administration recommendations relative to the timing of the project. And I'm not so concerned about whether we receive grant funding or not. We have to do the due diligence to try to do that. But I think this is a fundamental decision about whether or not we expand our infrastructure to meet particular growth-related demand. And I think we're there. And I think that the timing is now to do the planning and put it in the capital budget to do it in an opportune time. So, your questions, Madam Mayor, are diligent, but I think we're trying to back away from a project we're going to need, and the highway, from what I can tell, is ultimately backing up, and we've seen it quite recently relative to the whole issue with the signal timing and the stuff we've had to do there. So I think the timing of the project makes sense in my estimation. And we should adhere to that. It's an advice of our staff. I think it makes sense.
Okay, we're still open for questions. We're on to round 3. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. It's always possible to put a motion on in front of council and allow council to debate the question, and that applies to all councillors. To administration. It occurred to me that a couple of these assets, namely perhaps the fire hall, the water line perhaps, would be eligible for development levy status. And I'm wondering if that is the case and what work, if any, have been undertaken in that regard.
Your worship, Councillor Kelly, I think that there's, in terms of the levies themselves, we're just starting that update project now. We had a kickoff meeting yesterday on that, actually. And then there's a bigger philosophical discussion in terms of some of the soft services like fire halls and how we include that, or if council wants to include that in those levies. The new levy will have the ability to add that in fairly seamlessly if that's the decision going forward, and that is one of those discussions that still has to happen.
When would council be having that discussion, Mr. Schaefer?
I may have to look behind me a little bit on that.
Mr. Fleming.
Yeah, through your worship, we've actually had a few meetings about that. There's a significant amount of work that has to go into applying the soft service levies. We think that some of that work actually gets accomplished through things like the fire services master plan analysis and through the functional planning study. But there may be a funding request from administration to council for 2024 to sort of wrap that up so that we can look at creating it or adding it into a levy bylaw. Because the way the MGA is, it does say you can do those things, but there's a there's a regulatory requirement for the type and amount of study you have to do before you can do it, and even then, the levies can be appealed to the LPRT, which I believe is the case in Spruce Grove right now. They implemented a recreation levy and it's been appealed. So you have to do a lot of due diligence, and I guess what I'd say is we're sort of working towards making an ask of council to finish that work off. But it would definitely be my recommendation to look at it strongly for something like a fire hall. I don't know that we've talked about it for the water line, but I think that would actually be a possibility there as well, to look at it.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to those conversations. It's been something that's sort of sitting on the back burner now for at least a couple of years. The fire hall. I know that some communities, rather than build a fully equipped fire hall, will put in something much smaller with a truck and perhaps quarters for an overnight crew and treat it like a branch office or auxiliary hall to the main hall. And I'm wondering if you've considered something like that, because it would seem to me that it would be significantly cheaper and could easily serve a very strong purpose for at least a couple decades. So are we considering options when we look at the question of a new fire hall?
Through your worship, I'd say yes. What we did for the number that's in there now is just look around at what some comparable communities' fire halls cost them. And I would say this cost estimate sort of sits in a middle ground between your basic bays and a more comprehensive fire hall with offices and an EOC. And then one of the reasons why the fire hall project has moved back a year is so that we can have that conversation with council in 2024, where we look at what kind of scope and cost would be involved in a new fire hall. So the answer is yes, that conversation will be coming, and we're open to looking at the different range of options.
I would encourage that, Troy, obviously, and I look forward to that discussion. But a one-bay fire hall with some sleeping quarters attached to it and an office or two should be nowhere near $10 million, let alone 22. So I'll wait for the numbers. Thank you.
Okay, that looks like all of the comments and feedback. There is no motions to change anything, but it kind of gives you maybe a little bit of direction going forward, but keeping in mind that when the individual projects come forward, there definitely could be changes. So thank you very much for your presentation here today. Thank you. Okay, so I am being asked for a small comfort break. So let's say quarter after 3:15, we'll come back. It's 8 minutes. Okay, we've got everybody back in their seats, so we will start with the next one, which is the January to April 2023 Triannual Management and Financial Report. Clayton Northey.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. I'm here today to present the April 30th, 2023 Management and Financial Interim Report. I'm Clayton Northey, Manager of Accounting and Reporting for the city, and here with me is Colleen Wagner, Senior Accountant. In the first 4 months of 2023, some of the operating highlights included 1.47% property tax increase for the year, presentation of the Phase 2 Indoor Recreation Facility Study, the Northern and Regional Economic Development. The city received a Northern and Regional Economic Development Grant for the downtown and 104th Street Neighborhood Rehab Project. As well as work began on a new area structure plan south of West Park, and the city hosted a policing priorities town hall. The city is currently forecasting a $146,000 operating budget surplus for 2024, including $161,000 from general operation and a deficit of $15,000 from utility operations. Revenues are expected to be $528,000 higher than budget for the year, with investment income forecast to be $1.4 million over budget, but offset by lower than expected fines and penalties, property taxes, and other unfavorable variances. Operating expenses are expected to be $601,000 above budget this year. The city is forecasting to be higher than budget in salaries, wages, and benefits, as well as contracted services, materials and supplies, and below budget on service and maintenance contracts. The variance in other items relates to higher than expected investment income being transferred to interest-bearing reserves, as well as project carry forwards from 2022. More details on the operating results are available on page 5 of the interim report. The city's 2023 capital program includes 8 new projects and 32 multi-year projects that were carried forward from 2022. In the first 4 months of the year, the city has completed 6 projects, while 29 are on progress. 3 are on hold, and the 2 Veterans Way projects are currently classed as cancelled. The city spent $1.8 million on capital expenditures in the first 4 months of 2023, and expects to spend another $50 million to complete existing capital projects. We have additional information on that is attached in Appendix 3. Some of the highlights of the city's changes in financial position during the first 4 months include a decrease of $13.4 million in net financial assets. Typically this decline, there's a decline in the first third of the year prior to collection of property taxes. In 2022, in the same period of 2022, net financial assets dropped to $11.4 million. Investments decreased by $11 million as the city drew down on its short-term investments to fund 2023 operations for the period. Deferred revenue increased in the period due to receipt of the 2022 MSI funding allocation, as well as pre-authorized monthly property tax payments. At April 30th, the city had $75.7 million in financial reserves, of which 26 million is committed and to existing projects. Another 49.7 million is sorry, 49.7 million in uncommitted reserves. The city's optimal balance for 2023 is 47.9 million. Within that, stabilization and contingency reserves were underfunded by 4.1 million, and infrastructure life cycle project reserves were $1.3 million underfunded, while specific purpose reserves, project reserves, and restricted reserves were all overfunded by less than $1 million. Appendix 1 of the report includes a summary of the city's financial reserve balances and commitments. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy now to accept any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll go into questions. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. I'd like to just get clear in my mind, if possible, an understanding of the supplementary assessment that came out last December or last January. We had approximately an extra $1.5 million in property tax revenue for 2022. Am I correct in believing that that number would not have been anticipated when staff prepared the 23 budget?
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, the additional funds from the supplementary assessment would have been factored into the amended budget when council passed the property tax bylaw.
Okay, so the budget has been changed to include the now known or expected property tax revenue for 23.
Through your worship to Councillor Kelly, that's correct.
Was the budget also changed to reflect the council motion to increase budget for the fire services department?
Through your worship, to Councillor Kelly, the budget would be amended to reflect anything that would have been brought prior to the May 9th council meeting. Other than that, we would treat those as in-year variances.
So if we updated the 23 budget for an extra roughly $1.5 million that we didn't anticipate last fall, I would have expected that we would see roughly a $1.5 million surplus on the budget, and I don't. So I don't understand why. I mean, I can look at the line numbers, but we should have budgeted to break even before the $1.5 million. I would expect then a surplus of $1.5 million.
Mr. Fleming.
Through you, Your Worship, my understanding would be that we have incorporated the 1.5 million into the budget. Some of it's going to the fire department and some of it's going to reserves. The rest were committed to reserves. So that would all be factored in. It wouldn't show as a surplus anymore. That would be my understanding.
Okay, so then just to make sure I'm clear, you're telling me then that the motion to increase the fire services budget is factored into this report?
Through your worship, I'd have to defer to Mr. Eamon, maybe. Just to confirm.
So through your worship to Councillor Kelly, so to echo Mr. Fleming's comments, the additional supplementary assessment revenue was factored into the additional growth revenue, which council did allocate a major portion of that to the additional fire hall, or sorry, the additional fire services staffing, and then the remainder was allocated to the financial stabilization reserve. So the 2023 budget was amended. I don't think it would be reflected in the T1 though.
I'm sorry, not reflected where?
I'm not sure if the numbers would be adjusted in the, would they? There would just be no offsetting expenses. But keep in mind too that the fire services expenses aren't going to happen until the fall when those additional staffing are hired. So we wouldn't see any variance in the T1 at this point.
And thank you, Jeremy. So I think you're telling me, but I want it crystal. The budget, as in this report, has been changed to reflect the known increase in property tax revenue and the council motion that allocated some to reserves and some to fire hall and whatever. That's incorporated.
That is correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
We do have a forecast for year ended December 31, 23. I would have expected that surplus to surface out by then, but I can easily wait till the next 4 months go by and we'll look at it again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other clarifying questions on this? Councillor Abatoye?
Just little questions for you guys. So I see that we have some property taxes due, and I think it's about over 641,000. Small amount, but I'm just wondering because you had made a comment that some of these monies are from prior years, not just from 2022. So my question is, how long do we carry those property taxes, the dues? How many years before we write it off? Or do we ever write it off, or we just keep it on the books?
First time, sorry. Your worship, through to Councillor Abatoya. So with the taxes, the receivables, or the tax receivable, we can't do anything with
Just
the taxes.
come a little closer to your mic.
We can't do anything with the taxes until they're in arrears for 2 years. So then at that time, we would either look at a tax sale or a tax agreement for payment on those. So we never write off any taxes.
Okay, all right, perfect, thank you. And just my final question was just property taxes is very personal to me, so sorry. Your report says that we're reporting less property taxes than forecasted because of the grants in place. So how much less are we talking about? Do you have a dollar figure?
Through your worship to Councillor Abatoya, it's approximately 300,000 that
Okay,
we
so
dropped.
not significant. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions at this time on the Q1? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you very much for your presentation. All right, thank you. All right, we will move right along. We do have one notice of motion to deal with, Councillor Blizzard, so I'll have you read it in. Go ahead.
I make a motion that council direct administration to review the expense amounts within the council remuneration and expense policy and procedure GOV-009-C in addition to the budgeted amounts for overall travel and meals against the comparable municipalities specified in the council remuneration and expense procedure section 4.3B, and that the results of this comparison be brought back prior to Q3 2023.
Okay, thank you. I'll just have you put it up on the screen, and I will accept the motion, and you can speak to your motion.
If I may, Your
Oh,
Worship.
just a second.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Blizzard, I think that we might want to make a little friendly amendment to the timeline.
The end of Q3.
The end of Q3. I don't know if I could deliver that in 3 days, as it reads, unless my calendar is out of date. Q2 ends at...
I actually just took it out. You know what? I copied and pasted it from the agenda, and I didn't catch that. But yes, it should be prior to Q4 if we want to just change that one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It's her motion, so she can change it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, they're changing that. You can speak to your motion.
Yeah, and speaking to that, as far as I know, there hasn't been an increase in council budget since before 2013, as far as I know. I would like to get a history of our increases and see how we are comparable, just like we do for our remuneration. Right now, when we go to a convention, some kind of seminars. We have limited budget, and right now attending one sometimes is a stretch. And I know when I was on council before, we would attend generally, whether you attended or not, you could attend usually 2 within your budget. But right now, costs have gone up for meals, for hotels, for some of the other things. So I just like to see where we sit compared to other municipalities. I'm not looking for being able to go to a dozen conventions every year, but I think it's reasonable to be able to go to a couple of them. We have a couple of big ones. The province has a group called Alberta Municipalities. They host 2 every year. To be able to attend one of those would be nice. And FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, puts on one a year. That is also attended, or councillors like to attend. It's a very nice one for connecting with other municipalities, other councillors in other areas, and see what they do. So I think we need to look and see what our expenses are and whether we are being reasonable in the expense accounts we have now.
Okay, thank you. We'll go into discussion and debate on the motion. Councillor Harris?
Well, I'm just trying to understand. So I can't imagine this would be a big adjustment in any amount, but it would right size the allocation for that particular purpose. If this comes back prior to Q4, does that allow us to work that into the budget for 2024?
Through your worship, given the amount, I don't think it would be difficult for us to make sure that that's incorporated into the 2024 budget.
Yeah, I wouldn't see it would be a material, increase, but there would likely need to be some level of increase if we do this level of analysis. So, I can support it because you're just basically reviewing to determine that it's a current allocation to deal with, I guess, courses, conferences, and educational opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Abatoye, just a second on discussion and debate.
Thank you. No, seeing that the last time this was increased was 2013, I think it makes sense to review it. But I have a question for you, Councillor Blizzard. Did you find that with your recent trip to FCM, you had to use personal funds for things that you thought should be covered by council expenses?
No, I didn't. It's the first conference I've been to this year, so I was still under budget, but I don't think I can attend another one this year.
Right, okay. Yeah, no, I'll support this motion. I think it should be reviewed, but I'll be more comfortable approving an increase for the next council, not on this council, because it just feels funny to me. But I support bringing the reports. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Macon on debate.
Yeah, sorry. I'll support the motion. It's just asking for information to come back. And like you said, it's been 10 years since we reviewed it. And I think it would be a good opportunity to look at what we have in there and compare it to what our expectations are. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly, you were on there. I don't know if I took you off. Okay, no. So that looks like everybody for discussion. Oh, Councillor Nguyen.
Oh yeah, thanks. Basically, we're just going to ask a handful or basket of neighboring municipalities provincially with a similar size population of Fort Saskatchewan to let us know what their expense plans look like or expense policy looks like. Is that kind of the scope of work, and then
Yes.
do the report?
Through your worship, within the council remuneration policy, there's a list of comparable municipalities that have been approved in the policy. So we were probably going to focus on that group to try to get an understanding of how your travel expenses compare to those municipalities.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, I'll support the motion as it stands and look forward to seeing the results.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Blizzard to close. I'm good. You're good? Okay, the motion is closed. Please cast your vote. That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Are there any new notice of motions? Not seeing any or hearing any. Are there any points of interest? No, not seeing any. Are there, oh, are you on interest or inquiries? Okay. Counselor inquiries, Counselor Kelly to administration.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Fleming, as I commented to some of my fellow counselors before the meeting started, I'm having what I believe to be feral and or nighttime house cat issues in my backyard. They're killing the animals, the native animals in my backyard, and it's been going on now for a period of time. Does the city offer cat traps, live cat traps, or did we, it seems to me we canceled that program some time ago. Can you get back to me on it if you
Yes,
wish?
Your Worship, I'll get a full response back to you on that as to where we're at. I thought we stopped as well because we have nowhere to dispose of.
I have an idea on that. We can talk about it later. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Any other counselor inquiries to administration? Not seeing any, then I will take a motion to go in camera. Counselor Abatoye.
I'll make a motion that council goes in camera as according to FOIP.
Right, thank you. I'll close the motion. Please cast your vote.
Your Worship, I just need Councillor Noyens.
Okay, that is carried unanimously. We will now adjourn to in camera. Thank you.